I got the call from my parents the Sunday before Christmas. It's been a little bit of a tradition of ours that they'll come up on Christmas Eve. We'll share a little bit of a dinner before the first Christmas Eve Mass, and then they'll go right back home because all my brothers are with their families, so the Christmas orphans, that's my parents and I, spend a little bit of time together on Christmas Eve. Call was not surprising to me because my dad had been dealing with probably going on 3 weeks at that time, a really, really bad cough. And it was a lot of drainage from the sinus that was particularly preventing him from resting very well at night. He was already in the guest bedroom to not disturb my mother because of the coughing, and he just couldn't get his rest. Now, he wasn't grumpy, but he was definitely not himself. So I was a little relieved that they weren't going to try to make an extra trip, even though I missed our little tradition. And then he said, and I'm not going to be able to go to the family Christmas. I need to stay away. Oh, this is a little bit different. And before we lose our deposit, we're going to cancel our trip to Florida in January. Okay, this is pretty serious. Now, gratefully, I did get to see him the day after Christmas. He wasn't taking a lot of visitors, but he could be around people. And he never lost his appetite. That's when I never was super concerned. But over the last couple of weeks after Christmas, he was still having some difficulty in getting his rest. And it became almost like maybe this is sort of the new reality. When Jesus stood up in the synagogue and read from the scriptures and said that he was here to proclaim liberty to the captives, good news to the poor, sight to the blind, freedom for those in prison. What he was saying is, I didn't come here when you have things going well in your life. It was a very interesting reaction in the first reading. When Ezra is reading the scroll, and this is kind of a priest's dream come true, that the people are standing from daybreak until noon, and they can't get enough of the word. And then as the word is proclaimed to them, they've come off the exile. They're basically kind of like restarting up their nation and making sure that they're hearing from the scriptures as a way of kind of like, okay, let's get back to the basics. Let's remember what we're all about. And their reaction to that is they realize that that's not been quite the case. It might have been even what fed their exile. And so they're all now laying down with their faces on the ground, and they're sad because they recognize that they have blocked God in their life in some ways. And this is part of what we have to understand is that before we can hear good news, we have to be aware that we need to hear it. That things aren't so good, whether it's by our choice, or whether it's just part of what happens to us in our human journey. Now, one of the things that my father was doing very well in making sure he was getting lots of medical care and seeing different doctors, and finally got to a ear, nose, and throat specialist, and they did I didn't know you could do this. I'm learning a lot. They did a very thorough probe way up into his sinus. And I think they numbed things a little bit. And they found way up in the corner of his sinus, and actually later on in the other sinus, some infection. So they had tried some antibiotics, but now it's like, okay, we need to use this specific kind of antibiotic with this strength, stronger, to make sure we can get to this entire infection. Things started getting better. talking about the Word of God Sunday now, the third Sunday in Ordinary Time, a couple weeks after we get done with the Christmas season. And we think of the Word of God as like what Jesus did. He stood up and he proclaimed from the specific scriptures of one of the prophets these words that can be very inspiring. You certainly think of the blessing of our readers. And they proclaim the word from the altar of the word, and we hear them, and it's a different experience than just reading the Bible. Even if we've read these same readings ahead of time, because we're together, and we're hearing it out loud, and we're receiving it together. But the word is not just a bunch of words. The word of God ultimately is the person of Jesus. And our first and foremost invitation is to receive Jesus, the Word of God. And when we receive Jesus, we're receiving the fullness of the gospel, the good news. It's not just a message. It's like, oh, this is the secret of life. No, it's receiving Him. Receiving Him so much that this Word penetrates all the parts of ourselves that, if you will, is infected. That's not having goodness in it. Maybe it's choosing not to receive the goodness, or whatever is causing that. And sometimes we often don't even have a full awareness of that until we receive the Word of God, we receive Jesus, we receive His good news. I didn't come here when you're semi-perfect. I came to liberate the captives, to free the prisoners, give sight to the blind, good news to the poor. In both all the ways that we can suffer in our human condition, in the material sense, but also in all the ways that we can be in prison and poor and blind and infected with sin or evil. The Word of God is proclaimed to us for us to receive Jesus, who knows where all those places are. If we just humbly say to Him, like the people in front of Ezra, we need help. We need this good news. We need to be saved. We can't do it on our own. And when we recognize both the need and Jesus, who's way better than the most strongest antibiotic, it begins to transform our lives. Thank you for that witness, Michael. And it begins to transform our lives over and over again. That's what we're asked to be open to receive this proclamation. Well, on the antibiotic sinus level, recognizing what was really the case, the good news of the antibiotic has begun to do some incredible things. Kind of found out that this infection has probably been kind of around for years. And I have not heard my father talk so much about how good life is. And he's not a complainer. He's not a negative person. I have not heard him talk about how good life is. Of course, now he gets to sleep in his own bed. Now he hadn't been to Mass in a month. Now he's going back to his workouts. And then I knew that, boy, it's like the same old self. But it was like something even better, because I got to use one of their restaurant gift cards from Christmas. And my parents really don't like to go out to eat. And they didn't even get carry out. This is what the gospel does to us. It helps us to be who we're truly meant to be. And that is a people full of hope as we live this Jubilee year, as a people full of joy. And that we have to recognize we cannot create that on our own. But the good news of the gospel, Jesus, the Word of God, who continually proclaims himself and gives himself to us, is what will help us to heal from the infection of sin and evil in our lives. Let's be like the people that gathered in front of Ezra and heard Jesus himself proclaim, today these words, this salvation is fulfilled in your hearing and in your midst. And then, like those people with Ezra, we can go forth rejoicing in the strength of the Lord.